evening, and welcome. Well, that was a quick fade. It is time for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP, Urbana, 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. Excuse me, sorry. My name is Mr. Garza. I'm here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, Urbana Socialist Forum, or UPTV, as we say on the televised version of this show. These views are our own, and by our, in this instance, I just mean me. Me, myself, and I. Yeah, so it's been a couple of weeks. We had a guest last time. Very nice. I think he may come on again at some point in the future because he's actually running for political office, and he has lots to say about that all by itself, aside from his other views. But tonight, we're here to talk about immigration, as we always are. And in this instance, I thought it would be interesting to discuss the legal aspects of it a little bit. We touch on this all the time. Generally, what I try to do is humanize the issue of immigration and make you think about, or help you think about, I don't want to make you do anything, but I want to help you think about the people that are behind this, this question of immigration. Who are immigrants? Immigrants are people. What is immigration? Immigration is people moving from place to place, coming here from somewhere else. Thinking about it that way and not looking at it so much like sort of an idea that we're talking about, well, immigration, is immigration good for this country? Are immigrants good for our children to grow up with? Things like that. These questions, it kind of treats it as if it's a thing. For some people, like a disease. There's a disease here, and is it a good thing or bad thing? Is it deadly, or can we survive it? That sort of thing. But really, immigration is none of those things. It is all the different people that come here from somewhere else to live, and so they are, believe it or not, good immigrants, bad immigrants, mediocre immigrants, just like there are people everywhere. So taken together, you can't say that it is a bad thing. And in some ways, even I'll admit, you can't say it's necessarily a good thing unless you point to the different aspects. Immigration itself is just the act of people coming from somewhere else. That's all it is. So whether the effects of it are good or bad, those are depending on certain instances, on various people in various places. It's context specific. So it is a very complex situation, and it's difficult to discuss without talking about it as a singular idea, immigration, and yet at the same time it's almost useless to talk about it like that because you're really talking about people. But one way you can talk about it like that is to discuss the laws, because they create laws that are supposed to be one size fits all. So this law applies to everybody in this situation or who is doing this thing. And that is a way that we can speak about immigration as just a sort of a grand global subject. So I'm going to ease my way towards the legal aspect, but I thought I'd point out a couple of things. First, I have a couple of articles here that I thought were interesting. Last time we had a guest, but prior to that, way back weeks ago, we were, of course, talking about the wall and the standoff for the wall and the budget this and Trump that and all that stuff. I thought you'd be interested. By now, you know that the president has declared a national emergency in order to get his funding for his project here. So I thought you'd be interested in hearing how that's going. And this is in an article entitled, "Trump Has Done Nothing About His Month-Old Wall Emergency Other Than to Declare It." Interesting. So it reads as follows. Nearly a full 4 weeks into President Donald Trump's national emergency over his claims of an invasion at the southern border, his Department of Homeland Security has yet to submit a list of projects for which it needs Defense Department money. That list would be the basis for siphoning off billions of dollars in Pentagon funding to pay for a wall along the Mexican border, a wall Trump promised many hundreds of times that he would force Mexico to pay for, but which he never asked Mexican leaders about even once. The lackadaisical pace following Trump's February 15th declaration is proof that this is not an actual emergency. Never mind the number of years it will take to build a wall once the funding source is identified. Says Elizabeth Goetian, I can't pronounce that, Goshen, an expert on national emergency declarations at the Brennan Center for Justice. Quote, "There's no such thing as a 10-year solution to an emergency," she said. Neither DHS nor the White House responded to our queries about why that agency had not yet put together a plan for use of DoD money if the situation at the border is as big a crisis as the president continues to claim. A Pentagon official told us on condition of anonymity last week, quote, "Once DHS provides a list of the projects they request assistance on, the Secretary will determine if DoD can support. If DoD supports, then we'll be able to start construction." As of Monday, the official said DHS had still not provided that list. Trump's proposed 2020 budget asks Congress for another $8.6 billion, which would be enough to, quote, "finish the wall," according to his acting budget chief, Russell Vought. That amount is $7 billion more than the administration asked for the border barrier in any of Trump's previous budget requests. There's no such thing as a 10-year solution to an emergency. What? Oh, that's a repeat. Okay. Trump did not start making wall funding an issue until Fox News and radio talk show hosts started ridiculing him last March for failing to deliver on his signature campaign promise. Since then, he has swung frequently from claiming, falsely, that much of his wall is already under construction, to claiming, also falsely, that record numbers of human traffickers, drug smugglers, and common criminals are entering the country at points along the border where there is no physical barrier. Republicans close to the White House acknowledge privately that Trump's interest is primarily driven by satisfying his core supporters who badly want a wall. One outside Trump advisor said the president is not that worried that legislation undoing his February 15th emergency declaration will almost certainly pass the Senate this week with at least some Republican votes. "So we lose. He'll veto and they won't be able to override him," the advisor said on condition of anonymity. Trump's declaration would let him divert more than $6 billion from DoD programs to build his border wall, $2.5 billion from the Pentagon's drug interdiction program, and $3.6 billion from its construction projects. Multiple lawsuits have also been filed in hopes of blocking Trump's emergency declaration, the first such national emergency in 43 years of the law's existence that attempts to override a policy funding choice that was specifically made by Congress. Trump, hoping to minimize Republican yes votes on the disapproval proposal, has insisted that Republicans remain loyal to him. Quote, "Republican senators have a very easy vote this week. It is about border security and the wall, stopping crime, drugs, etc., not constitutionality and president," he wrote on Twitter Monday. "The Dems are 100% united as usual on a 20% issue. Open borders and crime. Get tough R's." So, if you have listened to previous shows, you will note my many comments about the wall. I don't have to reiterate them all here. But if you needed any proof that there is no national emergency, if you're, I don't know, I can't imagine that anybody that would listen to this show would harbor some, skepticism and go, well, it could be an emergency. I mean, I think everybody knows that there was never a national emergency and that this was only a stunt on his part just to get his way, even when he couldn't get it through legal channels. But even so, I think the delay, on top of the fact, as that one person pointed out, that a 10-year construction project is not a solution to an emergency. It's not really an emergency. But this next article should point us a little more in the right direction. This is entitled, Donald Trump's Real Target is Not Illegal Immigration, but Diversity. What do they mean by that? Well, let's consider it, according to this author. So when Juan Garcia started work as an urban planner for the government of Gaston County in 1997, he reckons he was the only Latino among its 1,400 employees. Hub of a dying textiles industry, on the western edge of Charlotte, the county was missing out on the boom already rippling through the periphery of North Carolina's most dynamic city. For that reason, Gastonia, its altogether less zippy capital, was not seeing many of the Mexican immigrants then pouring into the state to labor on the building sites erupting in Charlotte and revive the poultry industry in Union County, east of the city. But this was about to change. Finding opportunities overlooked by others in Gastonia's run-down factories and mills, migrants started settling in the town's trailer parks in poor black neighborhoods. Its Hispanic population soared to around 6,000, or 9% of the total, within a few years. This caused friction with Gastonia's white majority, recalls Mr. Garcia, who was born in Colombia. Mexicans like to get physically closer when we're talking to you than Anglos do. They might slaughter a chicken in their yard. They play loud music there. But the ill will rarely went beyond grumbling about the migrants' poor English. Some in Gastonia said this reflected the much deeper tensions in the South between whites and blacks. Resentment of immigrants was only a brief distraction from the main drama. In any event, the migrants, many of whom had either moved from Texas or come directly from the Rio Grande, expected no favors. So long as you treat people the right way, you're all right, shrugged Elvira, who came to North Carolina to pick tobacco 25 years ago and now works at the Las Americas supermarket in Gastonia. The influx of Hispanics to the town and hundreds of unfashionable cities like it illustrates how much they have changed America over the past 3 decades. The Hispanic population has risen 9-fold since the 1960s to around 60 million. Its members, many of them second- and third-generation immigrants, are dispersing across the country, driving growth and changing the social fabric wherever they go. While the white population is on the cusp of declining, most states have flourishing Hispanic communities. North Carolina, which had around 40,000 Hispanics in 1990, now has almost 1 million. The high growth rates it has meanwhile sustained owe a lot to this migrant infusion. To men like Julian, in other words, who had popped into Las Americas on a half-hour break between his jobs, from 5:45 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., he works as a machinist in one of Gastonia's surviving looms. Between 4 and 11 p.m., he drives a forklift in a packaging factory. Thus have Gastonia's Hispanic filled gaps in its old industries, taking low-skilled jobs that blacks and whites no longer want. Meanwhile, the many small landscaping and construction businesses they have launched have forged an overdue connection between Gastonia and the new service-based economy of the South, a 20-minute drive across the Catawba River in Charlotte. Recognizing the community's importance, as well as its needs, Gaston County now employs over 100 Hispanic public servants, with a premium on bilingual doctors, nurses, and social workers. This transformation is the essential context in which to view Donald Trump's talk of a crisis at the southern border. The president appears to be motivated less by genuine concern for the state of the border than by his white supporters' feelings of anxiety over demographic change. His promise of a border wall, which few immigration experts think America needs, following a steep decline in the number of illegal crossings, is a sign of that. In fact, were Mr. Trump not so obviously using his promised border wall as a political device, he might have built one by now. Last year, he turned down an offer from the Democrats that would have given him wall money in return for comprehensive immigration reform, far more money than his emergency is likely to get him. In short, the physical promise of the wall is largely a figment. It is a symbol of Mr. Trump's tacit pledge to his white supporters to defend them against the diversifying of American society that many fear. It is too late for that, however. Most of the growth in America's Hispanic population is the result of natural increase, not immigration. Mr. Trump's nativist stand is positively Canute-like. It also carries great costs. The most important is the foregone opportunity to cauterize America's immigration sore that his presidency represents. The anxiety of Mr. Trump's followers is exacerbated, explained even, by the chaotic legacy of decades of illegal immigration. It stands to reason that America's roughly 11 million illegal migrants, most of whom are Hispanic, are willing to work harder in tougher conditions than indigenous people. Economists may argue over the effect of that on wages, but it is a theoretical disadvantage to natives that they are bound to resent. Meanwhile, the insecurity illegal migrants live with is a barrier to assimilation, which also causes tensions. It was fairly amazing that most of the shoppers in Las Americas, despite having spent years in America, spoke little or no English. The answer to these tangled problems has long been clear. America needs to regularize, gosh, I can't talk. America needs to regularize the status of millions of illegal immigrants, while further improving border security to win consent for that change. Given Mr. Trump's hold on the nativist right, he could have done this. Yet that would have required him to want to fix the mess and not to seek to profit from it. The payoff for his party will be short-lived, however, because of another development among Hispanics. For several reasons, including the fact that many are illegal and unable to vote, their political clout has lagged behind their numerical rise. In North Carolina, they are 10% of the population and 3% of registered voters. Yet Hispanic citizens are now entering the property-owning middle class in vast numbers. The looming calamity for Republicans, who have done so much to alienate them, is that such people vote. Okay, I don't entirely agree with everything in this article, but it gives you a sense of we're moving towards this notion of what the wall is actually all about, and what Trump is all about, and what this whole thing is about. And that's what gets me to this next piece that I was heading for the whole time, but wanted to read the other things first to kind of put you in the mood, you know. You notice I brought water this time because I'm always all dried out when I'm in here. It's so hot all the time. Anyway, this next thing I thought was really interesting. It's an essay from a lawyer entitled "White Nationalism as Immigration Policy." Now, I know that some listeners might go, and recoil from that. That sounds pretty intense, and it is, but it is actually not really very far off from probably what is actually going on in the administration right now. I would argue that it's spot on, but we'll see. We'll read it. It's a little long, so bear with me. It is lawyerly, and there are a lot of references to various cases that form precedents, you know, and that sort of thing, which we won't have time to go into what they are. But you know, stick with it. Stick with the theme here. So I'll read the introduction, and you can see what I'm talking about. So 2 years into the Trump presidency, white nationalism may be driving the administration's immigration policy. We view white nationalism as, quote, the belief that national identity should be built around white ethnicity, and that white people should therefore maintain both a demographic majority and dominance of the nation's culture and public life, end quote. We do not use the term lightly, nor view all restrictions on immigration as inherently racist. Nonetheless, our review of the Trump administration's rhetoric and policies affecting non-white immigrants suggests this motivation. This essay argues that legal challenges to Trump's restrictive immigration policies should call out white nationalism as the underlying harm, both through raising equal protection claims and in presenting the overall theory of the case. Despite long-standing barriers to equality claims in immigration law, asserting these claims can frame public and political understanding of the issues at stake. Support social movements challenging racialized immigration enforcement, and offer an alternative vision for immigration law that rejects both racial criteria and the exceptional judicial deference long accorded to the political branches in immigration decisions. Okay, so first, Part A, rhetoric. The president's statements and policies suggest that he views U.S. national identity in racial terms and seeks to preserve the nation's predominantly white identity. As a general matter, the president has parroted ideas of white cultural threat popular among white nationalists. For instance, on multiple occasions, Trump excoriated the removal of Confederate monuments as a threat to, quote, our culture, identifying our culture with memorials erected to send a message of white supremacy in the name of a war fought to protect slavery. He gestured at the notion of a white genocide, a rallying cry of white nationalists worldwide, by tweeting support for South African far-right claims that white farmers were suffering from mass killings and land seizures in the country. Most notably, following the largest U.S. gathering of white supremacists in a generation, the president insisted that some who marched in Charlottesville were very fine people. With respect to immigration, Trump has repeatedly disparaged various groups of non-white immigrants. He began his presidential campaign by denouncing Mexican migrants as rapists. He allegedly commented that Haitian immigrants all have AIDS, and that Nigerian immigrants would never go back to their huts after seeing the U.S. He repeatedly conflated Middle Eastern and Muslim immigrants with terrorists, and falsely claimed that most people convicted of terrorism in the U.S. came from abroad. In addition, Trump has trafficked in age-old racist tropes, portraying immigrants as criminals, invaders, threats to women, and even subhuman. On one occasion, Trump described unauthorized immigrants as animals. On another, he conjured issues of vermin in describing immigrants as threatening to, quote, pour into and infest our country, end quote. Perhaps most infamously, he reportedly railed against immigration from certain countries. We will not use the term on this show, but you probably know what I'm talking about. An apparent reference to Haiti, El Salvador, and African nations, and asked why the U.S. couldn't get more people from countries like Norway. The president's comments on immigration to Europe even more strongly suggest that he views immigration as a cultural threat to the U.S., not just an economic or security challenge. He called immigration to Europe a shame and stated that it had changed the fabric of Europe and that Europeans are losing their culture. He railed against the German government, which had, at one point, welcomed Syrian refugees, calling it a big mistake made all over Europe in allowing millions of people in who have so strongly and violently changed their culture. Lest some might read these statements as pertaining to Europe alone, Trump drew a direct connection to the U.S. Quote, we don't want what is happening with immigration in Europe to happen with us, end quote. Putting together the president's claims of cultural threat from immigration with his vilification of non-white immigrants, these statements suggest support for white nationalist ideas. Even if certain remarks might be challenged as insufficiently proven or susceptible of non-racist meanings, the record as a whole cannot be read in race-neutral terms, nor should the fact that non-racial motivations for restricting immigration can exist sanitize the reasons Trump has actually expressed for curtailing immigration. Sorry. Another drink of water. So we're building our case here. Next, policies. The Trump administration's immigration policies reflect its white nationalist rhetoric. The administration has issued a dizzying array of policy changes that explicitly target or disproportionately affect non-citizens of color at the same time that President Trump's statements reflect racist intent. These policy changes represent the most wide-ranging executive branch attempt to restrict immigration policies in generations. Shortly after President Trump's inauguration in 2017, the administration instituted the first iteration of the Muslim travel ban, barring certain non-citizens from Muslim-majority countries from admission to this country. In 2017 and 2018, the administration ended temporary protected status for non-citizens from El Salvador, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Sudan, granted and renewed by prior administrations for decades in some cases, to protect people unable to return to their home countries because of armed conflict, natural disasters, or other conditions. Numerous Trump administration policies are designed to limit grants of status to Mexican and Central American immigrants. In 2017, President Trump rescinded the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, under which individuals who had entered the country without papers as children could obtain work permits. 94% of DACA recipients are Latino. The Department of Justice has also targeted Mexican and Central American refugees by heightening the standard that asylum seekers fleeing domestic violence must meet and implementing, later rescinded, draconian family separation policies. The administration is now defending a recent presidential proclamation that attempted to restrict the rights of individuals within the U.S. to apply for asylum, contrary to the plain language of the immigration statutes and this country's long-standing practices. The Trump administration has also dramatically escalated enforcement and detention, attempted to move deportation cases so quickly in immigration court as to preclude non-citizens from preparing a defense or finding attorneys, slowed down and tightened visa issuances, and planned to restrict severely the ability of certain indigent immigrants to obtain green cards, regardless of the strength of family ties. The administration has also markedly increased efforts to denaturalize U.S. citizens. While these changes do not, on their face, target a specific group of non-citizens, the demographics of immigration to this country mean that their impact falls predominantly on non-citizens of color. It is true that neither nationality distinctions in immigration law nor efforts to control immigration are new, but the president's racist statements and the breadth of the changes to immigration policy distinguish this administration from prior efforts to restrict immigration. Moreover, while it's fairly easy to link certain immigration policies, like the Muslim travel ban or the termination of TPS for Haitians, to the president's hostile comments about those groups, the president's statements cast doubt on the intent behind a wider swath of immigration policies, to the extent that the president's statements reflect a view of U.S. national identity as centered in white identity. They render immigration policy suspect even if the president has not disparaged the particular non-white nationalities affected. Another drink of water. All right. Immigration, white supremacy, and plenary power. This, I think, is where it gets really interesting. So white supremacy has a long and sordid history in the federal immigration laws. The immigration statutes openly discriminated on the basis of race starting in the late 1800s with the Chinese exclusion laws. By 1917, federal law prohibited the entry of all people from the Asiatic barred zone. The immigration statute imposed racially based national origin restrictions until 1965. And from 1790 to 1952. Oh, okay. Excuse me. That confused me there for a second. And from 1790 to 1952, the very definition of U.S. citizenship for persons not born within the U.S. depended on racial criteria. Federal law prohibited black people from naturalizing until 1870 and barred most other non-whites from doing so until the 1940s. Okay, so we have some history here. Constitutional challenges to these racist laws largely failed.